Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Michelle. It is now my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today's ceremony, Alana Kainz. Alana has kindly accepted our invitation to share with us her experience and insight acquired through her long grief journey. Please join me in welcoming Alana Kainz.
Thank you, Antoine. And thank you for having me here today. This has been a good exercise for me, too. You said kindly accepted. It's been wonderful for me to tell my story to myself again and to others because it's part of the grieving process. Because we don't get over it, we get through it. And even though 25 years ago, my husband was fatally shot leaving work, which was supposed to be a safe place. He was going to work. He was supposed to be safe that morning, and he was fatally shot. But like you, I'm here to celebrate the lives of those we have lost. Although I like to say to celebrate the memories we have of those we lost, who are now resting in peace. So I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a grief counselor, but I have a story to tell. And years ago, someone told me, one day you'll tell your story and help somebody else with their survival guide. Because when Brian tragically passed 25 years ago, I received an outpouring of loving kindness words, letters, phone calls, faxes, remember those, and that overwhelmed me and helped me through it. And so now I'm going to tell you my story. And it was August 1st, 1995. And I remember that morning very clearly. Suddenly, I got up early because I had the greatest story to tell in the business department. I was a business reporter at the Ottawa Citizen. And I woke up, and I was going to be front page news. I was going to tell my story on the front page. And at the time, I was listening to a lot of classical music because someone told me that if you listen to Bach, the composition, actually the way it unfolds, helps your thinking, helps you to write. So I was listening to Bach that morning, writing my story in my head. And then Brian came along and he started ballet dancing. He did pirouettes and leaping and plies. It was very cute. And I said, I've got to go. I've got like the best story in the world. Kissed him, told him I loved him. I'll see you tonight. And I did see him that night in terrible shape, of course. What happened that day was every night I would go to watch his newscasts with the sports section people, the journalists. We'd watch his newscasts. He was my husband, and he had Mickey Mantle on that night, and Mickey Mantle was talking about organ donations and for people to sign their donation cards. And lo and behold, later that would come to play in this horrible story that would unravel. Minutes later, I heard on the scanner shots fired in CJOH at the time. Now it's a CTV affiliate, but a man down in the parking lot. And being a cub reporter years earlier, I thought maybe it was nothing. Then the phone rang, and it was my first question to the reporter at the time was it him? And they said, yes, but he's okay. They said that in order for me to get there safely. So I arrived at the station, and it wasn't as planned. And he was seriously injured. The prognosis was not so bad at first. And then later that night, he was going into surgery, and that was the telling point whether he would survive or not. And I remember saying to the surgeon, it's a brain injury, but can you let him live? I'll take care of him no matter what. And the surgeon went in and then came out saying it's very bad. It's very bad. And I remember, I don't know if you've ever had that feeling in your throat. It's just a horrible feeling. But anyways, so what happened after that was we had to deal with the fact that he would slowly brain die. But that night on the news, Mickey Mantle and the organ donations, and it was a thought in the family. There was a small gathering. He was in ICU. There wasn't a lot of room for everybody. But we made a decision that night that really started the legacy of Brian Smith. And I don't even remember making that decision. It was a fog at that point. But about 36 hours later, there was a phone call saying, it's done. 13 people have been helped. We had 5 people whose lives were saved or dramatically altered, and at least 7 more people who would have benefited from the bone marrow in his cornea. And I remember at the funeral, Margaret Trudeau said, who got his beautiful eyes? He had beautiful eyes, beautiful, loving, caring eyes. So that was the beginning of the funeral process, and the people who attended the funeral were anyone from senators to the homeless. He had touched so many people, and I didn't realize that until he was gone. The number of times we went to restaurants, and he would tip very generously, and I would say, oh, Brian, that's a little much. I'd say, no, it's not. I think these people work hard. And then one time we were at a restaurant patio, and this man walked by and recognized Brian and said, because Brian was a well-known sportscaster, and said, can I have some money for beer? And, I'm saying, no. And he did. He gave him money for beer, and you know what he said? He said, just bring back the change. And he later said, well, he's honest. But guess what? That homeless man showed up at his funeral with the change and put it on his coffin. So we touch people when we don't think we're touching them. And Brian was well known. He was on air every night, and he liked to go out. We both liked to go out because he wanted to know what people were saying about sports. And he touched people, some people just for a few minutes at a time. But he was always kind and never said no to any conversation. And to this day, he teaches me to live like that, to be kind, and to every conversation is important. And so after the funeral, I got angry. I got very angry because it wasn't fair. And but I didn't want to live like that either. I wanted to make sure his legacy wasn't for naught. And so things just started to happen. First of all, the organ donations, and then we started something called the Brian Smith Foundation. And I, with the media people, which I'm thankful for the support for that. And suddenly we had over $130,000 in overnight just from leveraging his love for the community and the community's love for him. And I realized then that he wasn't just our Brian. I thought he was just our family Brian. He was the community's Brian. And at times I was resentful. I thought, well, if he wasn't so well known, we'd still have him. But I think there was a plan here for his life, where he could have this legacy. And then we also worked towards changing the Mental Health Act, because the man who shot him was mentally ill, and maybe there was a way to prevent the entire issue. And so somehow we did it through Richard Patton, who was a Liberal MPP at the time in Ontario and wasn't even the government in power. And the act was changed, and now it continues to be there. It's called Brian's Law. And it was actually 25 years later, it was challenged at the Supreme Court of Ontario, and it survived, because it was the way it was written was so well done 25 years later, so that the law allows people, families generally, to bring their loved ones to the hospital and keep them there and allow them to leave the hospital with community treatment orders so that they can leave based on certain conditions. And it's a good law. But Brian's legacy, what I'm most proud of is the Brian Smith Foundation and the Boys and Girls Club. We set up a partnership. And Brian was a member of the Boys and Girls Club of Ottawa, and they're now everywhere. They're everywhere. And he was first a member, and then he became a counselor of their camp. And he did so much work for them. And so when the Brian Smith Foundation, with the money that we had accumulated over time with this Canada's largest golf tournament for many, many years, and we eventually gave it to their camp, the Boys and Girls Club camp, which Brian attended and loved, and shaped him into who he was. And the camp survived. It was run down. The dining room was run down, and they were ready to close it. So Brian's tragedy saved this camp. To this day, helps so many kids. That is the biggest part of his legacy for me. So, and I still talk to people today, and they say, "Oh, do you know the story about Brian?" And I'm sure people out there are still hearing stories about their loved ones. I did not know that Brian, when he was in Los Angeles playing for the Kings, the franchise year, he played for the Kings, and he dated Donna Douglas, who was Ellie Mae for the Beverly Hillbillies. He never told me that. You'd think that's something he would tell. First date stuff, hey, by the way. But anyways, he was so humble. He probably thought I'd get hurt for it. But anyways, he was, I still to this day hear stories about him. And he was such a loving, kind man. And but some good can come out of tragedy. And that's what soothes my heart. And I do, every now and again, like you can go to a place and say, yeah, but if he was here today, my life would be different. Or, wouldn't he have loved watching the Masters with me? But I don't go there because he is with me. And so, I've come to terms with him not being physically with me, but having those memories in my heart. And Alfred Lord Tennyson said, "We are a part of all that we have met." And he was a part of all those people he met who lined up to go to his funeral. Certainly a big part of me. I learned from him today. I said that. And the people around me, and he, even his own dad, who I never met, he passed before I met Brian. We would be on the golf course, and he'd say, "My dad would say today, how can you not believe in God if you see all this?" And whether you believe in God or a higher power of some sort, it was, we would just enjoy that environment. And Brian filled every part of his day. If we were, behind a foursome that was slower than us, whatever, he would start doing sit-ups on the tee. He'd start doing sit-ups. So he filled every moment of every day. And if there will come a time when it's not, there did come a time when Brian wasn't the first thing I thought about when I woke up or the last thing I thought about when I went to bed. So 25 years later, he's still a very big part of me. And so my ornament today, I do have a tree story. I tell one more story. The Brian and I, you know how couples have this, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be? And I told him I'd be a palm tree because it's somewhere warm and resilient and hurricanes. And then he said, I'd be a maple tree. And I said, oh, okay. Why Brian? He said, because I like maple syrup on my cereal. He was a very uncomplicated guy. So this tree of life means a lot to me. We did plant a maple tree at the camp, Camp Smitty, and it means a lot to me that that tree continues to grow and be resilient. And this tree of life is a symbol for that. And so my ornament says, Brian Smith, forever in our hearts, forever our inspiration. Because he's not my Brian, he's everybody's Brian, I know. And I'm going to hang it on the tree. Thank you very much.